Hello, Indefinite Art Center artists. In this week's art prompt video, we'll be taking a closer look at some of our Fluxkit materials. By now you should have received these kits, and you may have noticed that there are 2 bundles of yarn, there's a 6x6 inch square of burlap, and there is a plastic needle. Remember that you can try stitching anything you'd like in these prompts. There are no set patterns or directions, so you can feel free to explore in any way you see fit. As you can see, I've decided to draw a little smiley face onto my burlap using a black Sharpie as a guide for my stitching. I've decided to fill the face section of my design with the purple yarn and to fill the eyes and the mouth with the blue yarn. We first need to thread the needle. I'm going to demo 2 ways to tie knots that I've found to be easy for me, but there are many ways to tie knots, and you'll have to find out which ways work best for you. For this first method, wrap the yarn around one of your fingers until it overlaps and you can pinch it between your thumb and your pointer finger. Start to twist and roll the yarn towards the tip of your finger. When the yarn rolls off your finger, it'll be twisted and tangled. Slide your finger towards the end of the strand of yarn, and soon the bundle should form a knot. For this next method, hold the needle between your thumb and your pointer finger, roughly at the eye of the needle, with the needle pointing away from your hand. With your other hand, take the other end of the thread and place it between the needle and your fingers. Make 2 or 3 wraps around the needle. Then, while holding onto the needle and the bundle of wraps between your 2 fingers, let your other hand grab the needle and pull it through, and that should form a knot at the end of your yarn. There are many ways to start filling your pattern or design. I've decided to do a back stitch around the outline of the design and then to fill in the rest. For a back stitch, bring your needle up through your sewing material so that the knot catches on the bottom of your material. Bring your needle back down into your material about a ½ centimeter down your line, or less depending on your preference. Once the needle is on the underside of your design, you'll want to make another stitch of about a ½ centimeter. When you bring your needle back up through your sewing material, you'll see a gap between your first stitch and where your needle is now. We want to fill that gap, so stitch backwards towards your first stitch. That's why they call it a back stitch. Repeat those stitches until your yarn runs out. When it's time to tie a knot, make sure that your yarn and your needle are on the underside of your stitching. Take your needle under one of your previous stitches, leave a loop, and come back through that loop with your needle. It's a simple knot, but it should do the trick. Some of these initial steps can be tricky, like threading your needle and tying a knot, so don't shy away from asking for help if you need it. For filling the eyes and the mouth, I've decided to use a single strand of yarn rather than doubling it up. This should make a small visual difference between the 2 patterns and will hopefully help to add some definition to your stitching. The stitch I'm using for the eyes is called a satin stitch. It usually works well to fill small spaces on your pattern. If you use a satin stitch over a large area, it will be fairly loose and it can look messy. But sometimes messy is good, so maybe that's exactly what you want. Stitch from side to side, making your stitching parallel and smooth. For the mouth, I went back to the back stitch. So far it's looking fairly alright, but I'm going to be using some extra materials to stitch around the design in black in order to show you what a stem stitch is and how to do it. It'll also help to add a bit more definition to the face and eyes. Stem stitching is useful for a lot of different reasons, but I'm using it for an outline. Start like any other stitch, bringing your needle up through the back of the material. Make a stitch that's about ½ centimeter in length, but leave the stitch a little bit loose. Next, bring your needle up through the back of your material so that the needle pokes through the middle of your last stitch. Pull it tight and repeat this process. Stem stitches look like a continuous stitch, and it can look clean and polished. Can you see how these stitches look like a solid line? So there you have it, a little project to help practice different kinds of stitching, and a way to try fiber art. We're excited to see what you've designed and made. You can always share your photos of what you've been working on by sending them to info@ouriac.ca.